It just sucks. I used to just tell consumers, buy this, you'll love it. Get the extra large size. No?
That's why you're not in business any longer.
Yeah. Seriously though, consumers, I mean, we talk about it all day long, consumer, they're in control. They're data points, they aren't data points. This is so ridiculously challenging. What are you guys thinking about? Anybody can start.
Well, I'll start, and I'll just add a little bit of context in with Unilever, and we love that consumers are in control right now, and I think if you step where we are in terms of strategy, it's a vision to double the size of the company while reducing our environmental impact and adding social value, and so this is a bold agenda, and honestly, 20 years ago, I don't know if we could have achieved it because the tools that are out there now and the access that we have to consumers is unbelievable. This is a marketer's dream to live in this environment where they can access this in rich formats and different apertures and different spaces. And if anything, the premium for us is to create content that consumers want to seek out, spend more time with. And for us, it's about not only growing, but doing it in a socially responsible way. And just an example would be a brand for us like Dove, where we've set out to touch the lives of 15 million girls in a positive way and reinforce self-esteem and body image. And the most recent example that's out now is called Dove Legacy, where we, through social listening, have found from mothers and daughters that the legacy mothers leave and how they talk about body image to their daughters is unbelievable, and it's very powerful. And so through social listening, we've now come back and put this out, and it's now quite active in the viral space. But we couldn't have done that without the tools that are out there today.
We echo the same. We have more data today at Meredith. We reach 100 million women every month across all platforms and life stages, from trailing millennials to empty nesters. And we do it through a combination of branded experiences, brands like Better Homes and Gardens, All Recipes now, as of last week, Martha Stewart Living, and Weddings, as well as rich first-party data that these consumers provide to us in droves. We have data from 100 million consumers, both offline and online, within social, email registrations, et cetera. And ultimately, it's really helping shape where we're going as a business. And the fact that consumers are in control, it's an opportunity and a challenge at the same time. It's forcing us to really think about what consumers are telling us, actively search for what they're telling us, and ultimately delivering on those value propositions across all platforms in an integrated experience that's seamless. And not only that, at the same time, figuring out how we can leverage that data and that consumer input for the brands with whom we work to drive better ROI on the investments that they make with us in terms of advertising or marketing services. So we embrace that. It's really shaping who we are as a company, and we're very excited about the fact that consumers really are at the level of control that they are.
Now, Ben, consumers control what they buy in the supermarket for Unilever, and they control at the newsstand what they pick up. With you, they're holding the remote control. They can just, wow, it's brutally, it's real control. It's always been in control, but it's different now.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, definitely in terms of just how content's consumed, the consumer's in control in terms of when, how, where they're accessing programming. I think the difference now, though, is that there are more data sets available on the TV side. About a year and a half ago, we introduced census-level audience data, which really allowed us to do two things. One, define audience in more customer terms, meaning instead of age and gender-based attributes, it was literally taking either transactional data or viewership data, or in the case of Better Homes and Gardens, we could literally take their subscriber file and through third-party blind matching, match it against our file so that we could express audiences in terms of Dove customers or Dove prospects, which is not only helpful in terms of delivering more relevant ads to those audiences, but also on the back end being able to take the ad exposure data and then measure performance.
So in the old days, as a marketer, I would want to put together a media mix. People think that this is new. Media mixes are not new. Magazines were never measured the same way as radio, was never measured the same way as television, was never measured the same way as outdoor. There's always been a reach curve. There's always been some media blender you had to put together and get some ROI calculation. So that really isn't new. But what's on this stage is fascinating because Here Todd is thinking about a way to communicate. He's got a message he wants. Better Homes has a whole data set that's about her. You guys can then literally match that data set to your television distribution platform and holistically touch an audience in a way that was unimaginable 2 years ago. It's like, really? That's all happened on the stage today. This isn't like sometime in the future. We're talking about this afternoon. If you guys felt like doing it, that's what could go down.
We could do it in New York anyway.
All right, no,
But
that's
I
a
think
start.
a lot of the dependency on the television side is really moving away from kind of sample-based measurement, which is okay from a gross ratings perspective. Probably less so today, just because of the audience fragmentation. I mean, we can all see that the limitations of that in terms of the accuracy of the measurement and the completeness of the measurement. The first thing we learned after we started acquiring the data, that there is a lot of audiences and a lot of programming that is not measured, too small to measure, and that rolls up to a pretty significant number. But I think the more important point that you made, which is being able to have a holistic view of that mix and understanding how to control impressions and the dialogue and the customer engagement across platform in a real collaborative way, rather than managing, say, frequency on a platform by platform basis, being
Right.
able to manage this kind of dual and triple exposure type frequency. I think that's where things get really interesting, because you can control that mix.
Todd, where does this all fit into the way you guys look at the world? I mean, Unilever is one of the most progressive organizations when it comes to using new tools. I would say it's as innovative as any brand out there. How do you approach this? I mean, this is changing as we're sitting here on the stage. Like, the technology is enabling things that haven't been possible before. So
Yeah, I
where's
think
that all
it
fit?
starts with not getting overly fixated on data, but it's more about the insight. And we start always with brands and brands with purpose. And by crafting the brands and having very clear about what it is and what it isn't, it provides then a backdrop. And in this environment, we do believe that brands need to be socially relevant and penetrate culture and but do it in a way that's very authentic and consistent with the brand. So aperture is very, very important, and content is very important. I think it changes the old rules. We can't go out and create 30-second TV ads and print ads and push it out there like the old world. We have to really be agile. So what we do is each brand has a very clear sense for what it is, what it isn't, and then looks at what are we hearing, where are people, what is socially relevant right now, where are the trends, and then what are the moments where our brands insert themselves into the lives in a contextually relevant way, where we get much higher engagement. An example for us would be we had a huge launch of Axe Peace, which is a more sophisticated articulation of the brand proposition. It's always been an insightful, witty brand that is focused on what we call the mating game.
Spray Axe all over yourself and girls will love you.
Now, this is the old articulation.
I'm just saying, that's what
but- So
I've tried it. It doesn't work for me, but I know if I was 14, it could.
No,
Just saying.
this is not what Debbie told me. But to close the story, last year we were on the Super Bowl with Axe Peace, and it was this idea of make love, not war, and a whole campaign, hashtag Kiss for Peace, and it was about these grand gestures of love, and how do we insert ourselves into the idea of grand gestures of love. We heard that Macklemore was on the Grammys having same-sex marriage. And so Axe was really there, culturally relevant, with a message about Kiss for Peace and the power of this. And on Twitter, we had 48% engagement, which normally it's 1 or 2%. Because the brand has its clarity about purpose, but it's involving itself at a moment that has real relevance.
So let's talk about that for 1 second. I don't want to use concrete examples because I'll get in huge trouble with friends and family, but there are TV shows that are numerically popular that have no cultural relevance whatsoever. And then there are some TV shows, some magazines, some pieces of media that have relatively small audiences but fight so far above their weight for cultural relevance. It's hard to say number one show, right? Because you can say it number one against Two-Headed Monsters with Ethan Young on Thursday. I mean, you can always make a number. But you've said cultural relevance several times, Todd, and I'm trying to understand from the data sets available and the way you guys as publishers, like, how do you interface with cultural relevance versus numeric strength? Well, we've got scale, because everybody talks scale, and here, one of the largest advertisers in the free world is saying, well, scale's great, but it needs to be culturally relevant in order for it to matter to us. Discuss.
So to me, at the end of the day, it's a combination of the branded experiences, what you know about the audiences, the storytelling aspects, the combination of the art and the science. The science in and of itself is nice to have, and you can provide some insights and analytics. But for us, without the experiences in which you can integrate your message to the consumer, it's far less powerful. And so we reach, one of the things that people don't realize about our company is we reach about 6 million Latinas across all of our brands every single month. I believe if it's not second to Univision, it's close. And that's something where we have a lot of cultural relevance for Latinas, for African American women, for Asian American women as well, across all of our portfolio. And that's fascinating to us, particularly on the Latina side, where a lot of it is in the English language or for bilingual Latinas. So that's one thing that we focus on a lot in order to try to continue to appeal to different segments and be culturally relevant in terms of the content that we're creating.
So as presidents of groups, the buzz phrase of 2014 is data science. Data science roughly defined as pattern matching by machine. I'm going to go in and use some algorithms to see if I can find some patterns in data to find culturally relevant little bits. You found out that you were #1 against 6 million Latino. It was like, what? I remember when that happened. That was like a huge insight. The machines come back and say, oh, by the way, did you happen to know you guys killing it in this particular demographic? Talk to me about that. What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? We're learning a lot. It's not about data, but it's about data. What we got?
I'll just tag on and add that for a number of years now, we've actually been doing what we call is almost reverse upfront, where we bring the power of our brands and our equity and our innovation and engage with media properties and say, here is our vision, here's what the brands stand for. And for example, Caress is a brand that has a very high engagement in Hispanic consumer. And we share that and then work with the media properties to say, how do you put a package together? It has an immersive experience and it has higher engagement and it's relevant at the right level. So it's a bit of a flip to say, rather than just receiving, here's the upfront, here's the reverse upfront, where we then have a real co-creation process. So it's not a one-way or just a transactional buying, but it's about an integration of where the consumer is at, what's appropriate for them.
So the goal is velocity, right? At the end of the day, Todd, you just got to move cases, right? You're a CPG firm. Velocity has got to be the marketing goal. Is there some place in this engagement metric where you try to tie it to attribution? Is there some way that the industry can help you be better at attributing your media dollars? Is there something, like, I hear it every day, but I don't see concrete examples of it. Lots of companies tell me they've got it all locked, and you peel one layer of the onion away, it's like, okay, you're using all the same third-party data sets we're all using, and you're just throwing them in the blender and seeing what happens. Talk to me about attribution and engagement and where those things are in your head.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a clean answer for you, but I think where you're headed is exactly right. But your premise, I would not agree with, which is your premise of it's only about volume and selling more. I mean, we're in the business of building brands and being very particular about the equity and nurturing the equity. And so it's not just about moving cases, although obviously in the end, the example would be back to Dove, where for years and years there was a paradigm that we talk only about the functional message and superior care, and in the context of a category, how the brand is superior to competition. And
better than brand X.
Yeah, and this for many, many, many years was our marketing
You were one
approach.
quarter cleansing cream, if I remember.
Yeah, well, by the way, we still love that it's 1/4 cleansing cream. We don't walk away from it, but
I don't know what that means, by the way. I never have. But
Okay.
I understand that whatever that's in that bar is 1/4 cleansing cream, and I'm assuming that the other 3/4 is something that's not. Just don't know what that is. Sorry.
So that's a whole nother discussion.
I'm
Let me
just
finish
wondering,
my point.
I mean, since you're here, but
So the point I was on was that we went off-site with Global Brand VP, Sylvia Legnato. It was this idea about purpose and how does purpose, what's the brand's purpose? And out of that came the whole campaign for Real Beauty. Now, we're not abandoning the functional performance message or the medical program. All of these things carve out a different facet of the brand. You know, the history of testimonial advertising, the empathy of Real Women, talking about the role the brand plays in their life. How, you know, Jean Shai, one of our Real Women, talked about how she smiled and Reverend Walker gave her a compliment, and she said, it must be the dove. And the emotional warmth, but also the conviction and the role the brand plays in their life is important. But this next piece was really about a master brand level, not just a functional level within the context of a category. And in order to get senior executives at the time engaged on this, we went out and filmed their daughters talking about their own body image. And so one of our executives, Jeffrey Probert, his daughter, talked about self-consciousness, about the Probert nose, and each of them had their own story. We cut a short film, and this was so captivating that it ended up becoming a film that we later produced for Super Bowl. It's called Little Girls, and I don't know if you remember it, but that launched on Super Bowl in 2006, and it was very powerful. So to our point, that's difficult to measure selling cases immediately out the door.
Sure.
But it's a registration of what the brand stands for, and this idea that beauty is a source of confidence, not a source of anxiety. And over time, we believe this builds the equity of the brand and does translate to growth.
No, I'd just like to comment on the engagement metrics, because obviously, you know, especially with TV, you know, where you're dealing with a lot of the top of the funnel brand executions, it's how engaging is the copy, how engaging is the placement. With the tune-away metrics and the tuning metrics, we can actually measure kind of the average dwell time on an ad or a show. And the tune-in metrics, meaning how many audiences that you were targeting actually tuned in, are just as important as the tune-away metrics or tune-out. And that's what's really interesting about the television metrics, is that you actually get this kind of negative option. You know, the web is about click-through rates. TV, you can actually learn just as much about where and why audiences are tuning out, whether it's at a point within a particular piece of ad copy, or in some cases where advertisers are trying to test different treatments, they can actually look at the tune-away metrics to see on average how long the average target audience viewed a spot.
So does this get us closer to a definition for what I always call the concept of engagement, as opposed to the metric of engagement, which no one seems to have a metric for?
It's closer. I don't think it's the only. I think it's one data point, almost like, you know, click-through rates are somewhat of a proxy of interest. You know, that the tune-away metrics could be an indication of either, you know, stronger or lesser amounts of engagement. And when you compare either the copy or the placement, it's really fascinating to see a lot of these long-tail networks that aren't really being kind of measured in you know, using conventional sample-based methods, that are tremendously engaging because they're highly contextually relevant, and certain ad messages really resonate there, and those networks really haven't been available to a lot of brand advertisers because they haven't been measured up until, you know, recently. So it's fascinating.
So the title of this panel, Consumers in Control, is a proxy for this idea that their behaviors generate a really large set of interesting data points. And as we live in a world where we can measure these better, we're learning stuff. How do you guys think about approaching that amount of data? Every one of you has talked about data in the context of beauty, which is not what I would normally think of, beauty and data. Engagement metrics don't tend to have a lot of data associated with them other than time spent, and then everybody gives it its own spin, like this is what they mean. And yet we're now being fully sort of steered by a set of metrics we just didn't even have a couple years ago. So I can only assume there's going to be more of that. Talk to me about the strategy that you guys as presidents will have to adopt based on new data sets coming in and saying to you, hey, this is what consumers are doing, and now we know what we didn't know before. What does that mean?
I think of one perfect example for that, for what we're seeing, is that Within All Recipes is a brand. And we've now gone in the last 24 months to a place where we know that roughly a quarter of our consumers in a given month are sitting in the store with All Recipes, a recipe on their phone, figuring out what they're going to buy to make for dinner. We also know that when people, if they're in their house, are looking at a recipe, within 24 hours they will be in a store. 25% of those people will be in a store buying it. Within 2 days, 75% of the people that are looking at will be in a store buying it. And we have been able to take data, and ultimately we know what ingredients are going to drive the decision to make that recipe, and we can put offers right next to those ingredients and actually demonstrate to our media clients and the agencies that represent them that that offer ultimately drove that transaction in that retail outlet, and not only increased basket size, but also went from being a recipe to the basket to food on the table. That's something we could have never done 2 years ago, and it speaks to the theme about consumers being in control, how we can continue to leverage that data to provide value to them, and at the same time simultaneously provide value to our advertising partners.
Can I just build on that? Because we have a brand called Nora, and the whole campaign is about what's for dinner. And we know that at 4 p.m., 70% of meal makers don't know how to answer that question. And so there's a huge need to have the right relevancy at the right moment in time. And as John said, our data says 68% of people on shopping trips are using mobile in some way to engage, to get either information, education, inspiration, price checking. And so mobile is, for us, just an absolute, powerful tool. And having that relevant communication in store. I know earlier there was the mention about the iBeacon technology, how it can be leveraging all of the purchase data from the loyalty cards and appended data. And so then we can inspire with the right ideas. You bought this recipe, here's, either a repeat consumption or inspiration for another recipe that will extend the usage. And it's not only in food, it's certainly in food, but it's also in beauty, where, for example, in hair care, high penetration of shampoo, 98%, conditioner 60%, but all of the post-wash serums, treatments, dry shampoo, single-digit penetration. So to really create growth in the category and inspire usage, this is where education, inspiration, ideas about how the regimen is relevant. And we would know if Susan is shopping and she has purchased items for fine, thin hair, that we can serve a message that is inspiring about how to get the look for that specific hair type. So it's headed in a very interesting direction.
What I find fascinating about this conversation is the year of mobile had been coming for every year for 15 years. And then all of a sudden last year, it was the year of mobile. And this year, and everybody, I think, understands that lower eighths isn't mobile. Shopper marketing is mobile. Television viewing on the public internet, on a device of your choice, on any screen is mobile. Cars are mobile. And it's pretty fascinating to me that we are having this conversation today because, to be fair, this isn't a future conversation. This is a what we did, how we're doing it, what we're doing. Now, everyone on this panel can remember 3 years ago when we would have been talking about this subject in future tense. And people were saying, oh, it's 5 to 10 years out. That was not more than 36 months ago. It wasn't. In fact, we were having some future tense conversations that were seriously close to this last year on this day, on October 23rd, a year ago. Now, I've been saying all day, today is the slowest rate of change you'll ever experience for the rest of your life, and we know this curve is accelerating. We got 4 or 5 minutes left of the day. You guys, you're charged, each one of you, as presidents of your divisions, with thinking about what's next. Now, what's next 5 to 10 years ago happened inside of 36 months, and that was our 5 to 10 year plan. I'm going to ask you, it's a year from today, we're going to be sitting here again, and we're going to have a conversation. What do you think is going to be keeping you up at night? Like, what's the future? What's the science fiction that's not, what do we don't have that you guys know you got to get to? Because everything you just told me was science fiction 24 months ago. and it's all science fact right now. So key takeaways. We got 4 minutes. What are the key takeaways?
Yeah, I think for us, we're at a tipping point in terms of e-commerce because, now it's 2 to 5% in our categories. It's quite low, but you have, what were traditionally brick and mortar partners who have really entered and now look at the store base as distribution centers that can reach end consumers very rapidly with finished products. And I think this Christmas will be a very big sea change because many of them now are saying that delivery fees completely waived, any size order, they're going to compete to win.
Buy a pack of toothpaste.
And
Let's
now
go.
it's almost like, if you were charging in the old days for television, we'd have very low penetration, but advertising paid for it, so it's ubiquitous. I think that there's been a kind of a slow uptick on e-commerce because of the impediment or the barriers of fees. That becomes part of just the standard business expenses, and there's consumer services where they have the common touch point at the point of influence, the point of purchase, the point of fulfillment, and it's the consumer in control. You want to buy it in the store, you want to click and collect it, you want to have it delivered to the home. It all becomes seamless and a single experience, and there is no barrier to. So I think e-commerce will be hitting a real inflection point.
From our perspective, we're kind of migrating from, conventional pay TV business to really a connectivity provider, and we're fortunate in that we're powering one of the most digitally concentrated communities in the world, really, and that's both on the residential side as well as commercial. But I think, going forward, the ability to take all these, connected devices, whether it's eventually cars or other commercial applications, they're all riding on our network. With Wi-Fi and the explosion that we've seen, aside from just lighting up hotspots, we've just seen such huge growth on Wi-Fi activity, and to be able to correlate location. We talked a little bit about kind of these contextual alerts. I tend to think mobile is more about contextual messaging than it is more about kind of overt advertising, whether it's something tied of relevance, whether it's a traffic alert or a weather alert. But just being able to have kind of a centralized view of our subscribers and then being able to message to them in a relevant way based on the different devices that are connected to our network, and whether that messaging is commercial messaging from advertisers or whether it's programming. I think just having a central view of that whole array of connected devices is really what I think Nirvana would be for us.
I would echo everything that Todd and Ben just said. Look, I think at the end of the day, one of the things we think about all the time, a couple of things we think about are how do we balance old and new? How do we balance our most loyal customers with the new things that are in the marketplace and the new customers that we want to attract without alienating, our best customers, number one. And number two, want to make sure we continuously innovating. Particularly as a company that's a traditional media company and most of our revenue comes from traditional media sources today, how do we continue to create an environment where you almost have as much of a startup mentality as we can, particularly on the digital side, to create an environment where we can prototype things and fail fast, to create an environment where no one's penalized if we do something that's ultimately a mistake as long as we learn from it, and then it's an informed risk that we took, and how, most importantly, how do we make sure that we're not too internally focused as a company? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, what we've seen is many of the best ideas that we've gotten and that we've ultimately deployed have come from clients and the agencies that represent them, have come from strategic partners, and ultimately have come from consumers and people like everyone in this room. So any ideas you have, please bring them my way. And we really place a premium on that. That's, I think, what helps us stay innovative.
Outstanding. Gentlemen, thank you so very, very much. Ben Tata, Todd Tillman, John Werther. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so very, very much. Outstanding job.